Hi there and welcome to Studio SN. My name is Sara Naumann and today we're winter card making with Eclectica stamps. My card today features a painted embossed background in the cool colors, and that sparkly embossing on here makes it great for winter themed cards, but of course it's also appropriate for cards in just about any season. Even better, this background is super easy to do. So let's take a look. First, I'll start with a piece of plain white matte cardstock, and this is going to be my background. I also need to have a couple of tools for this. I'm working with a clear acrylic block, and this is a fairly large stamping block, so this is going to be my palette and also act as my stamp. I've got two different paints that I'm working with today. I've got the lilac and the orchid. These are both from PaperArtsy. They're the Fresco Finish chalk acrylic paints, and these are going to be used for my background, and then also I'm going to do some spattering with this beautiful orchid color. So I'll set aside the orchid and have my lilac on hand. I also need to have my embossing powder on hand, and this is from WOW Embossing. This is the Diamond White Embossing Glitter, so this is what's going to give me a little bit of sparkle and shine. The last thing I need to have on hand is a mini brayer, and this is what I'm going to use to spread out that paint on my acrylic block. I'm going to slide aside my paper and then give my paint a little bit of a shake, and I just need to apply a little bit of this, just kind of randomly on my block. I don't need to have a whole lot because I don't want to cover the entire block. I'll take the brayer and spread this out. You can go both directions if you want to. Again, I'm not trying to get the whole block entirely covered. I want some open areas on there as well, and some kind of raggedy edges. Now, while this is still wet, I'll just pick this up, bring in my white cardstock, and stamp this down. So I'll just press this on here and lift, and I've got a really cool background that's got some pattern and texture to it too. Now, while this is still wet, I'm going to bring in my embossing powder and just sprinkle on a little bit of this. I don't want to cover the entire thing, although you certainly could. You get a really cool but very different look. And then I'll bring in a piece of folded scrap paper and just tap off the excess here. And then I can use that folded paper to return the rest of that embossing powder to the jar. Then I'll bring in my heat tool and just heat set that embossing powder. Now, as I'm working here, of course, this is also drying my paint, so this is a nice benefit to that. So I'm going to move the embossing gun all over my background so I make sure not only is my embossing powder embossed and melted and heat set, but I'm also drying that paint as well. And I think as I'm moving this, you can see how that embossing powder is changing into a bright white, really pretty sparkly color on here. And this is going to give me that beautiful texture and dimension. Of course, as I'm embossing, I'm working on my heat-resistant surface. So I've got a craft sheet under here. And that's going to be really important, especially if you're holding the embossing gun on here for such a long time. Really want to make sure that you're not trying to hold your cardstock in your hands or working on a surface that's not heat resistant. Okay, so I think I have the whole thing heat set, and look how gorgeous this is. A little bit hot, but I'm going to hold this and tilt it for you so you can see that sparkle and shine on there. Now, the next step that we're going to do is adding a little bit of spattering to the background. So I'm going to bring in another clear acrylic block, again using this as my palette, and I'm going to use the Orchid Fresco Finish. So I'll just put on a little dab of the paint, and then I'm going to add a little puddle of water on here too. I want to get a bit of a watery effect. I'm working with a stipple brush. This one is from Faber-Castell. This is one of the best tools that I have on hand, so if you like this technique, it's worth investing in a stipple brush, although of course you can always use a toothbrush as well. So I've got this loaded up on my stipple brush, and then I'm just going to spatter this onto my background. And you can see that nice fine effect that I'm getting here, and that's going to just add a little bit of color and a little bit more texture and pattern on here too. So finish up stippling this on and clean my painty finger. Slide this aside, and then the last thing I want to do on my background is add my stamped branch on here. Now the stamp that I'm using, all the stamps that I'm using for this card are from the Eclectica ESN18 stamp set. So I want this really nice big branch. This branch was actually in my front garden, and so instead of picking it up and putting it in the garden refuse, I picked it up and brought it inside and took a photo of it. So I've got this now as a stamp, which is great. It works wonderfully on the backgrounds. And I'm going to ink this up and stamp it using a pigment ink, and this is from Colorbox. It's the Crafter's ink, and this is in Bark, which is a really beautiful, dark, rich, dark color. And that's going to be just perfect for this card design. So I'll turn this over. And I want it coming kind of off the piece of cardstock, and simply press down like so. So you can see I've got the branch on here. It is not perfectly stamped, which is fine because it does allow for some of the texture of that embossing to create a little bit more dimension on there as well. So I've stamped that on here, and I do need to let that dry. While this is drying and while that spattering is drying on there, I can also come back, holding this carefully. Here's my block where I had that orchid paint on there. I'm going to add a little bit more orchid to the watery mix. And taking a cosmetic wedge, I'll just load this up with a little bit of that paint, holding this like so. I'll edge around all 4 sides. And I'm not going to do all 4 sides, but I think you can see how nicely that contrasts on there. And I can even bring in a piece of white paper so you can see how pretty that painted edge is on there. So I went ahead and edged all 4 sides on there. Now while this is all drying, I can work on my card focal. So let me bring back in this focal piece on here, the card, so you can see this. So the bird has been stamped and heat embossed and popped up with 2 layers of foam tape onto this circle background here. So the method for this, first I did my circle, and this is a 1 3/4 inch circle punched piece of cardstock. And so I've taken a piece of plain white cardstock and spattered it with the lilac paint, so again using that stipple brush, and then just punched a circle out from that. I edged it with the orchid, same way I did before with that cosmetic wedge, just went around all the sides on there, and then put it down right onto where that branch is. Now for the bird itself, the bird has been stamped and heat embossed. Now the bird is a bigger stamp element than you see on my card, so the actual full stamp looks like this. It's the bird with the various branches on here. But of course for the card you can see I only have the bird body itself. So I stamped this and heat embossed it using WOW's Primary Burgundy Red Regular Embossing Powder. Like the Bark ink, it's a nice dark brown, which really just adds a nice color and dimension to this. So then I just trimmed around the bird body and popped him up onto foam tape. So he's up on foam tape onto this circle piece. I've also got some ribbon going across here, and then this piece, this is also from the same stamp set. This has been stamped also using the Bark ink pad, and that's on a 7/8 of an inch circle punch piece. And then that lavender cardstock on here, that's a 1 inch circle punched piece. Try saying that 3 times fast. So I have this part layered up on foam tape as well. Now my background is mounted up onto white and then onto that beautiful purpley pink, and I've also got it onto navy. Got some navy ribbon going across here, some purple and white baker's twine, and then all of my various pieces kind of tucked in and on top of that. 4 brads, 1 in each corner, and that just adds another little bit of dimension on here as well. So this is how to make a pretty painty embossed background for your winter themed cards, or indeed for any season. I hope you enjoyed today's show. For more ideas and inspiration, please stop by my website at saranaumann.com. If you liked today's video, I invite you to subscribe to Studio SN on YouTube, and I will keep you updated with a new video every Wednesday. Thank you for joining me on Studio SN, and I'll see you again next time.